This was once a Hungarian military outpost. Now, it's the Bishka refugee camp for those who fled Southwest Asia, the uncertainty in the Middle East, and the violence of ISIS. More than 1 million migrants and refugees crossed into Europe in 2015, sparking a crisis as countries struggled to cope with the influx and creating division in the EU over how best to deal with resettling people. The migrants make their way from Turkey and Greece up through Europe, seeking whatever country offers the best social welfare program. In Austria, a wave of immigrants overwhelmed the system, causing overcrowding in processing centers and negative reactions from citizens, even those who'd been open to allowing them to come in the first place.
I was very open to the migrants. I had the feeling that every asylum seeker, every migrant has to find a place here, has the right to seek for asylum. I was not afraid of other cultures. I was very open to other cultures. After some months, I realized that it's also dangerous for our system here in Austria.
When you start seeing hundreds of thousands of young males on the move, that is not a refugee crisis. A refugee crisis is women and young children. What you are seeing is the largest mass migration in modern times, and you're seeing it from two very different directions. You have a largely Syrian migration coming out of the Middle East. You have an enormous migration coming north out of Africa. If you're in Italy, the vector is Libya. If you're in Greece, the vector is Turkey and Syria. But what's happening to Europe is huge numbers of people are showing up who have no interest in being assimilated.
10 years ago, it wasn't a problem for me to go running in the parks during the evening or to go home by metro by my own. And nowadays, I do not feel as safe anymore.
You can have a successful immigration policy if you're bringing in people who are willing to become French or British or American or whatever. But if you start importing people who explicitly reject your culture, reject your values, reject your religion, and who want to have enclaves of their own, you're really buying long-term problems on an enormous scale.
I never thought about being able to defend myself because I thought it's not necessary. Some weeks ago, it was the first time in the metro when I thought about it. I realized in the metro that I'm the only Austrian person. I felt like I was in a metro in Istanbul. I just realized that I didn't feel as in Vienna anymore. I feel myself as a foreigner in my own country.
This is Vienna, Austria, capital of a nation with a well-earned reputation as one of the friendliest, most welcoming and charitable people on earth. It's also important to note that here in Europe, there's no country with a constitution or a Bill of Rights protecting the right of an individual to keep and bear arms. But here in Austria, there's a new reality. As millions of asylum seekers flood into Europe from the Middle East, Southwest Asia, and Africa, there's been a corresponding spike in violent crime, robberies, assaults, rapes, and murders, and high-profile radical Islamist terror attacks like those in Paris and Brussels. And now, tens of thousands of Austrians are applying for permits to purchase firearms for self-protection. The Johann Springer store is one of Vienna's oldest firearms dealers, dating back to the 1830s. According to the news reports we're seeing back in the States, firearms sales have quadrupled in the last 2 years.
That's true.
Why?
The reason why Austrians nowadays think about home defense is actually of this immigrant crisis in Europe.
Yeah. What is it that the customer wants and why do they want it?
Since the attacks, customers, they are asking for pepper sprays, for combat training, or even hand-to-hand in combat, and small concealed carry weapons like Kubotans. Women are, if they are outside in the evening, you have some big crowds, most of the time immigrants, of course. And that's a big issue. That's a big issue because our security level nowadays is not really on the top level anymore.
You've seen that diminish in the last how many months?
Last couple months,
yeah.
Weeks. I live in a very urban area. Nearby, I have a subway station, and you see the crowds. You see the crowds. They're shouting, they're drinking, and so security feeling is not really present anymore.
Paris, Brussels.
You
Those
name
kinds
it.
of attacks?
You name it.
They're concerned.
Yeah.
After the Paris attacks, it was the first time when I was really scared to be in a public place. It was a strange and very new feeling for me.
The massive influx of refugees has caused political upheavals as well.
I asked myself, what does it make me an extremist? Just because I want to keep my own culture. I think that many people feel that loss of culture, but they are afraid to communicate it because they are afraid they seem as extremists. My question is, what will we become in case so many people come to Austria bringing their own culture? I'm convinced that this will create divisions.
Since the start of the Syrian civil war and the spread of radical Islam through much of the Mideast, Southwest Asia, and Africa, tens of millions of displaced people have fled their homelands, creating the largest flood of displaced people since World War II. At home, the Obama administration claims it cannot vet refugees before admitting them to the U.S. But here in Hungary, besieged by a spike in violent crime and the vows of ISIS to plant jihadists among the refugees, the government in Budapest has responded by closing their borders and making it a felony to enter their country illegally. The Obama administration has proven unwilling to take similar measures to protect the American people. From the Bicske refugee camp in Hungary on the front lines of freedom, I'm Oliver North for NRA News.